Good morning, everybody. I'm Professor Elizabeth Torres from Rutgers University, and I will be presenting to you today about latent capabilities, predispositions, and preferences in the most neglected side of the autism spectrum. This is research from my sensory motor integration lab at Rutgers. Latently, it's a word that we're going to use in our research and in apps that we're developing to help move the research forward. It is to exist in a latent, dormant, or undeveloped state, often capable of emerging or becoming active later. We believe this is autism in general. We believe, and we have evidence, accumulated evidence from the past couple of decades that autism is arrested neurodevelopment and that we can't awaken it. The research that I will be presenting today aims precisely at that, to awaken the sensory motor control in autism and the autonomy through agentic research. And I will explain what that is. I would like to start out with a clip from our conference, our New Jersey Autism Center of Excellence conference that we ran from 2018 to 2023, and I was the executive and scientific director of this center, which was funded by the Governor's Council of New Jersey for autism research. And here we will see Evie and Elizabeth Vossler, the leader of speech Spell to Communicate, and Ian, who she's been working, and this is 22 years later, he is independently communicating to us, and this is at the beginning of the conference, and he was thanking us. So I'd like you to appreciate the tremendous effect that this process of learning has on minimally verbal or minimally speaking individuals on the spectrum.
Inform and guide the organization. So you'll learn a little bit about our journey together in just a second. Ian, would you like to say anything to start us off? THANKYOU, thank you. GIVINGME, giving me. ACHANCE, a chance. TOPRESENT, giving me a chance to present. ISUGEHONOR. Thank you. Giving me a chance to present is a huge honor.
And Ian is in the 30% of the ASD that cannot talk and present profound somatic sensory motor issues and needs years of external scaffolding and a process of learning that requires support, but can gain independence with this initial physical support. And so I will be presenting research to demonstrate the need for support, but also to provide new methodologies, new technologies to enable that. What we know today about minimally verbal ASD, this very neglected part of the spectrum, is that the brainstem, the primitive brain, has problems since birth. We know that neuromodulation systems have issues too, so switching behavioral states is challenging, but not impossible. And we know that prolonged sensory processing delays on the order of 2 milliseconds in lateness impact chronometric maps to estimate action consequences and therefore impede the ability to connect the intent, the mental intent, with the physical volitional movements. Autonomic dysregulation impacting the full system. The system is in sympathetic overdrive and persistent flight or fight mode, and we will show you evidence for that and also elements that enable us to track this information and dampen the dysregulation to bring the system to a state where it can learn and alleviate the cognitive load that all of this dysregulation produces. These are measurable symptoms, profound sensory motor issues. We have developed the technology to measure this in real time and to intervene in real time. Mental intent is disconnected from physical execution. We have the methodology and we have the patents, the US and European patents that enable this quantification and incorporation in technology that is highly scalable. Instructive voluntary movements are compromised. Pointing and grasping initially need external scaffolding, but in due time can become independent. Uninstructed spontaneous movements and highly automated motions like gaze are okay. For the most part, they can cooperate and the system can demonstrate intent and reading comprehension abilities. And there is research that supports that from other labs. It's important to create this notion of an architecture that scaffolds from the bottom up the autonomy of the system. And to that end, we bring to your attention 3 fundamental types of muscles: cardiac for autonomic, smooth muscle for all kinds of involuntary functions of the system, and a skeletal muscle for voluntary control. They form these, that we have proposed this maturation, this ontogenetic orderly maturation that happens on a schedule and starts out from the bottom up. And these scaffolds, the autonomic, the autonomy of the system through reflexive, involuntary motions, spontaneous, automatic motor programs, and finally voluntary control that requires supervision, mental intent, matching the action consequences. And then this scaffolding then produces the top-down control under instruction, which neurotypical individuals develop by the time that they enter school age. So this is a scaffolding that needs to happen from the bottom up rather than imposing it a priori without understanding the needs of the system. Part of the success of our research comes from scaling broadly to thousands of individuals. And we did that during COVID, developing a new model where we very rigorously tested our algorithms and embedded them in devices that we can send home, and we can use then our concept of our lab in the box to decentralize the production of clinical biomarkers from a lab and go actually to the person's home and do everything from the comfort of the home or from clinical settings, or school settings, where we can utilize these ubiquitous technologies that exist that we carry in our purse. The first thing I want to show you is the autonomic imbalance and the type of sympathetic overdrive that we have quantified by now in hundreds of individuals on the spectrum, and in both cross-sectionally and longitudinally in several studies that have gone for several months remotely. So this is evidence for the need to scaffold autonomy in the autonomic system. There is emotional and autonomic dysregulation. We have demonstrated hidden facial micromovements that are present and in minimally verbal individuals on the spectrum. Active facial universal action units exist, and they are expressing emotions, but the intensities of these activities are beyond our perception. So they fall outside the range of what we can perceive. HRV is highly dysregulated in sympathetic overdrive. And what we have found is that the ophthalmic area, the eyes and the eyebrows of the face, forecast erratic HRV entering sympathetic overdrive. So we can, with simple videos, monitor these activities. But in the case of individuals on the spectrum, when they attend school, the philosophy there is to keep their bodies quiet. What our research has fundamentally uncovered is that they need to move, and preventing them from moving naturally causes extreme dysregulation and sends the system to sympathetic overdrive. So when you go to any of the schools for autism, what you see is these quiet hands, quiet bodies, icons all over the place. So I want to alert you that this is extremely stressful, traumatic to these individuals, and that it needs to stop. So instead, what we have is provided solutions where we have agentic, self-driven actions that calm the system down. Self-paced walking helps, dancing to music, even a screaming off the top of their lungs releases excessive energy and noise that the system carries. So resting on their own terms help, but not impose resting a priori. So please stop doing that in the school systems. And I encourage clinicians and other people that work with this part of the spectrum to enforce this agency, this autonomy in the system, and to scaffold agency and autonomy so that we provide self-volitional control. How do we measure it? How do we know that this is the case? Well, we have known for years about exquisite maps of the face and the body mapped out in the across the dorsal root ganglia and the spinal cord segments. We have body maps, and we also know of body schemas that dynamically update through movement reference to a sensation, to kinesthetic sensation. And we also have the trigeminal ganglia linked to the brainstem innervating the face. And so we divide our maps above the neck and below the neck. So I'm going to go over research in our lab that goes and measures this unobtrusively above the neck. And this has been thanks to the advances in artificial intelligence and computational vision and machine learning algorithms that provide the ability to extract from video information about the gaze, the face, motions, variability, the pupil in the eyes, the orientation of the head. And so all of this information paired with HRV characterizations can give us a sense of how the system is doing. And this kind of online regulation tracking enables them to alleviate the cognitive load and engage the person in learning. We have seen that when you enforce a stillness, when you a priori assume that the system can follow instructions and that has volitional control of their actions, the system becomes very dysregulated, and we can see this in the face. This is asking a person to remain still for briefly 5 seconds, and this is the neurotypical control. And neurotypical control can remain still, and there is no pollution of involuntary, undesirable involuntary movements. In autism, this is not the case. And we do that with our Latently app that very briefly in the context of less than a minute, in 30 seconds, we have the activity necessary to give you a score in real time of the dysregulation of the system. And this comes from our patented technology, the micro movement spikes, that gives us information about the different biorhythms of the body, the heart, the face, and provides, even at rest, information about volitional control. Indeed, we miss a lot of this information from observation alone. So technology can give us the information, the level of precision, the level of granularity that we need, because the human body is in constant motion, generating continuous stream of kinesthetic reference movement that goes back to the brain as feedback. And by tracking this microscopic rate of change of the, for example, of the movement speeds in our motions, over time, we can isolate the micro movement spikes, illustrated here in red, and these standardized deviations act as a universal physiological language, measuring the invisible noise in both the facial muscles and the heart and the heartbeats. And we can then come up with a pipeline to extract this biorhythm micro movement spikes in unobtrusive and highly scalable ways using a standard commercial webcams and basic wearables. We can extract movement relevant data from 5 seconds windows, eliminating the need for invasive laboratory assays. And the process is very simple. We capture with sensors that we can take home, we process the information, and we examine the output of both biorhythms in a standardized waveform called the micro movement spikes that corrects for allometric effects due to anatomical disparities across participants in age and in sex and so forth. We then map out different regions of the face. Ophthalmic region has proven to be very informative of dysregulated states and sympathetic overdrive during pain. And we have chronic pain or induced pain in neurotypicals. We have the maxillary region involving the nose and the lips, and we have the mandibular region involving the mandibular region of the face. This is an example in controls and verbal individuals that can speak in autism of the differentiation between different regions of the face. For example, here we differentiated three major regions: the mandibular in cyan, called here the red ophthalmic, and the area, the maxillary area, including the nose and the lips. In this data, which is plotting the micro movements, gamma estimation, empirical estimation, gamma parameters, gamma summary statistics, gamma mean, and gamma variance, we can see 3 clusters self-emerging here clearly in the distributions of the mean, for example. And we can look at the distribution of the mean then in the autistics, and we see that there is a fusion in the region of the eyes and the face and the maxillary region. And then the mandibular region is isolated, this region here. So we already see that there are fundamental differences in the way the mean activity parcellates, and it's automatically detectable in these 5 seconds long videos that we take with our app. And then below the neck, we can also look at the HRV and other motion parameters. For example, in this experimental assay that we used in neurotypical controls to first characterize their dysregulation under pain, we use a 3-step paradigm where we evaluate the system before pain and the baseline control state. We then induce pain through a blood cloth inflated at 200 pressure, and then on the non-dominant arm, we leave it there for a few minutes while we measure different tasks and during the lingering sensation of pain. And this gives us a safe way to ascertain the levels of dysregulation in the face and the heart during tasks that have different demands, different cognitive demands and different biomechanical haptic demands. So we use 4 tasks. They are organized here in levels of biomechanical and pressure feedback, haptic demands from low to high, and in cognitive from low to high, cognitive memory load from low to high. At the lowest end is resting, just the person is resting, and we measure the HRV and the face. At the higher level of feedback, haptic feedback and pressure feedback are a pointing task and also a groove peg task, where they are to insert a groove peg on a groove hole and match it. And this requires a level of cognitive control by having to translate the orientation of the peg, visually capture, and to the haptic orientation and produce the movements. And then at the highest level of cognitive load is a segment of the Montreal cognitive assessment task, which is the trail task, which has to connect digits and alpha numerical characters on a board. We included 41 neurotypical controls, young undergraduates, in this experiment, and were able to mathematically characterize the signature of pain, whereby low noise to signal ratio in a predictable regime of the stochastic signatures of the HRV and the face can give us information about the predictability of the system. And then this shifts to a high noise to signal ratio and an erratic, chaotic, random memory distribution. And this can be represented by the gamma parameter plane as points in this is 2 representative participants in the ASD and the non-ASD group. So this is the predictable regime, and this is the random chaotic regime. And so we have a way to statistically and mathematically characterize these states. And of course, sending this home and doing this at a scale at the home or at the clinic is possible with the means that we carry around. And this is the pipeline that helps us understand autonomic dysregulation from the RR peaks, which we subtract and look at the interbit interval timings, and then use the established physiological signatures in the literature for sympathetic and parasympathetic regimes. Sympathetic regime in the low frequency range of the frequency band and power decomposition of the IBI, the interbit interval timing signal, and in the high frequency, the parasympathetic regime. And so here's a regulated heart in the expressed in a magnitude scaleogram This is a representation of frequency over time, and the color here represents the energy, the power of the signal, which in the dysregulated case, when the pain is being experienced, highlights an abnormally elevated low frequency band expressed in sympathetic overdrive or flight or fight mode activated. And this can be then also, besides the frequency domain, we can look at the time domain and look at the Poincaré plot that shifts the timing of the signal, the scatter, and measures these ellipse that then establishes the two principal axes, the larger axis in the sympathetic regimes, SD2, and the shorter axis in the parasympathetic regime, SD1, which we can then put in correspondence with our gamma noise to signal ratio, perfectly corresponding with an R square of 0.97 and above. And this is then expressing in this correspondence the regulated phase and the dysregulated phase, and we can then measure the action units, the universal action units involved during the pain sensation. And interesting, when we see the autistic individual, the minimally verbal individuals with ASD, or the non-speakers, as we call them, we see that at rest, they have similar signatures as neurotypicals present in the pain state. And so they are in sympathetic overdrive, and these can be expressed both by the heart and their faces, in particular in the ophthalmic region. We then move from this developed system into the earlier times of life in neonates, when the sensory process issues start very early at the brainstem, where we find prolonged response delays. And I invite you to then think about all those years that take to diagnose autism, on average 4.5 years of age. And during this time, we then have these problems with the brainstem that we have characterized in neonates, both in the state of Florida and over 250,000 babies, and in the state of New York, where we had the diagnosis available, and we were able to see the delays, the prolonged delays that the responses have. This is a test that is given at birth, and I just want to alert you of the readiness of the brainstem at birth, and the involvement of the brainstem in all the chronometry of our actions, in protective reflexes, in swallowing through central pattern generator, spontaneous motions, respiratory, locomotor, postural networks showing the expression of emotions, the saccadic motor map, and the reaching maps. And all of this happens in the brainstem, which is connected to the cerebellum and to the spinal cord, and then it's involved in all the apparatus, the vocal apparatus that is shared with the vocalization and the synergy necessary to produce sound and phrases. So why wait so long until emotional and social criteria are detectable and reliable across graders? Why wait so long when we have the physiology that already tells us this at birth, that something has gone astray? This is, again, a test that with very little effort can be transformed. And this is an opportunity, because it's a routine auditory screen test that is already given to neonates, and the evoked auditory brainstem response, or ABR, that we can now with our algorithms detect the delays and provide information to correct it as well, because we detect targets for treatment at very precise stages of this signal traveling all the way from the ear, the cochlear nerve, all the way to the pons and the midbrain, and finally the primary auditory cortex. And at each stage, we detect these shifts in delay. This is the two important pieces of information. Is not only the shift in delay, but the narrow bandwidth of the temporal information in autism. In babies that go on to receive the diagnosis of autism 4.5 years later, whereas in neonates that go on to develop neurotypically, they have a broad range of temporal information as opposed to this very narrow bandwidth. And they are much earlier responding rather than up to 2 milliseconds later. When we add all this information, the cumulative prolonged delays are on the order of 1.74 on average, and in a system that operates on microsecond time resolution. So this is essentially giving us causal information about a lot of the so-called behaviors that we observe in autism. They're not behaviors, they are physiological dysregulation of the system that we can then characterize very well and start the path of correcting, because they interfere with motor control in the red nucleus, connection to the cerebellum and the afferent information that it provides to the brainstem, and the efferent information to the cerebellum and other areas of motor cortex. Then we have also characterized neuromodulatory imbalance and the difficulties with fluidly switching between behavioral states. And this is a problem that we see in autism. It's called in the criteria repetitive behaviors, but in reality is nothing but this neuromodulation that is also going on. And Dr. Eric London has proposed long time ago an autism unifying hypothesis that involved the locus coeruleus norepinephrine system. And we have provided evidence in our research that in fact it is possible to switch the system from different modes. And just briefly, the locus coeruleus and the norepinephrine system, also called the LCNE system, is a tiny nucleus of roughly 1,600 cells that controls neuromodulation for the entire central nervous system, and is connected impacting the prefrontal cortex and various regions involving executive control and social and emotional regulation, the hypothalamus and the amygdala, also involved in emotional and regulatory modulatory functions. And this is the system here in the brainstem, and it has afferent and efferents to targets for wakefulness and the sleep cycles, for autonomic function, neuroendocrine functions, motor functions, and sensory functions. It's an extremely important system that integrates autonomic, neuroendocrine stress, and higher order cognitive inputs, and regulates all these cycles of wakefulness and autonomic function that we know are excessively dysregulated in minimally verbal individuals. The mechanics of attention mediated by this system and in adaptive gain control theory come in two modes, exploring versus exploiting. And in the exploratory mode, we have this tonic firing with a smooth baseline wave associated with arousal, non-focus scanning, and seeking new environmental rewards, and requires moderate levels to allow optimal phasic bursts. And this is the mode that enables us normally to scan the environment in search for new surprising events that engage us, and switch us to this phasic firing, which is called the exploiter, in brief sharp spikes, about 10-20 hertz bursts, and elicited by salient stimuli. The salient stimuli surprises us and grabs our attention and drives intense task, focused decision process, and filters out background noise. These two modes are constantly navigated fluidly, and in autism, they are in profound imbalance. And we have high tonic activity and chronic stress overdrive driving the system, and suppress phasic responding, so that the switching is not possible. So in ASD, the brain remains in a state of high tonic firing, actively suppressing phasic responses. There is biological evidence for higher baseline pupil size in children with ASD, which we measure unintrusively and serves as reliable proxy for high LC-NE activity. And the result is a hyperphasic state, resistant disengagement, or a complete inability to filter out ambient noise. So because of this, we can reframe repetitive behaviors, and in this dysregulated system, we can regulate it through our interventions that engage surprises, engage agentic, self-initiated action, and instead of top-down imposed a priori control. The symptom that we see is insistence on sameness and rigid routines and highly restricted fixated interest, often referred to as stimming. But in reality, what we don't see is this failure to self-regulate that we can now encourage with our new technologies. The biology, attentional shifting and behavioral flexibility rely on the LC-NE system, and to reset neural networks. A dysregulated system fails to release the brain from a salient focus, so they remain engaged. The downstream effect is abnormal associative learning and consolidates idiosyncratic fascinations into long-term memory. So we can utilize the regulatory axis, the HRV, the facial variability, the pupillometry to disengage the system. And indeed, we can do this through our proposed architecture, functional architecture, ontogenetically orderly maturation of the system that we scaffold from the autonomic, from the bottom up, to create the ability for top-down control. And we do that across different ages, engaging the system through ubiquitous technology that we carry on. This is an invitation to think about all of the dysregulations that we have in the system that we can actually see all in the face through the ophthalmic region. We can use it as a proxy for this autonomic dysregulation, and for motor control that we have detected in excessive random noise through gaze patterns and through gait turning patterns that the system does not possess, and is it has an imbalance in the gait. This technology that we have created, it provides a scaling empathy through the use of this technology that can, for individuals with ASD who often experience dysregulated resting heart rates and cannot verbally articulate distress, this framework is transformative. Using nothing but commercial webcams and wearables, we can objectively see pain in real time, and our lab-in-the-box methodology then paves the way for scalable, personalized therapies in the comfort of the patient's home or of the clinic. These are steps towards supporting communication, and as we started with Ian, who took many years to become independent, we can accelerate that process in children from a very early age. In conclusion, we need a paradigm shift in education, addressing latent communication capabilities in minimally verbal ASD. We can start very early screening for core physiological symptoms preceding the autism diagnosis. We have found profound somatic sensory motor issues in minimally verbal ASD that require scaffolding autonomy from the bottom up to gain top-down predictive control of action consequences. Biosensing technology is available to aid the educators and clinicians and to promote agency, agentic learning to gain motor fluidity, switching between unfocused scanning versus laser-focused attention mode towards motor fluidity. Thank you for your attention, and I will answer any questions that you may have.